Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining today. So I'm Vlad. I'm from Foqal, and today I'm joined by Anthony from Sysdig, and he's going to talk about their experience with Slack support. And I think I'll try to play a little bit more devil's advocate, but I think one of the goals today is to really understand, and really the most interesting part of it is this is understanding like why do people even want to support customers in Slack? So Anthony, thank you for taking the time to chat with us today. Maybe to start off, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, about Sysdig, and maybe for a fun, thing so that people can think about something fun as opposed to other topics of the world. What's your favorite type of pizza? Let's
Sure.
have a debate on pizza instead.
Uh, yeah. So, hi everybody. I'm Anthony Field. I'm the director of business operations for a support organization at Sysdig. So, Sysdig, for those who don't know, we're a cybersecurity company. Of course, it's very broad. What we basically provide is kind of like a comprehensive sort of cloud container, kind of Kubernetes security solution that helps organizations with secure with their to secure their modern cloud applications, basically from build through runtime. Basically helps teams kind of reduce risk in the cloud and container environments. Um, from Boston, so I don't know if anybody out there is in that area or near there. I have a couple kids, play saxophone, and my favorite pizza. I'm boring. I'm a pepperoni guy. I've eaten it since I was probably 3 years old. I don't want to eat anything else. I'll try stuff, but that's where I'm going.
I'm actually on the same boat as you. Like I think the way to indicate how good a pizza place is just basically getting like either a cheese pizza or pepperoni pizza or like a margarita pizza, like something very basic, just so you can like you have that level playing field when you're comparing. Actually, I didn't know. Also, didn't know that you play saxophone, and that's pretty awesome. Um, so I know that like kind of getting into the Slack support world, right? I know that it kind of predates you a little bit at Sysdig, but so it wasn't necessarily that you were there at the deciding factors, but again, from what you've heard and everything else, can you tell us a little bit about like why Sysdig is supporting customers in Slack, and maybe talk about as much as you know, like how did it get started? How did Sysdig start supporting customers in Slack?
Yeah. So it kind of started where customers, they really just wanted to communicate with us via Slack. Our customer success team, they actually kind of started a lot of these conversations with them. And then it got to the point where the CS folks, they were pulling in support engineers into their conversations whenever certain questions came up that they couldn't answer. And it was mostly with our larger kind of higher revenue customers that we were doing this. That's how essentially they get assigned with a CS person or a CS customer success engineer. And so what ended up happening was this became more and more popular. We started to see support getting pulled into more conversations, and we from a support perspective, we couldn't really show data or metrics behind the work that they were putting into these, right? So it just got to the point where it needed to be scaled. We needed to operationalize it a bit, and that's where we turned it into something a little bit more formalized. And so that's really how we went from really just this sort of manual ad hoc, if you will, solution to more of a formalized, like now we are okay with supporting any premium support customers who want to who want to actually talk to us and essentially open support cases through Slack.
So to kind of take a step back there, I mean, you mentioned you kind of started off small, and then I mean, I guess in the beginning it was just like, yeah, you had like one or two customers, and then people. Can you talk a little bit about like how is it practically that people were doing this in the beginning? Like if you're thinking about maybe supporting customers in Slack, like would you go out and build some crazy process, or would you just start off small and just have a couple of customers in Slack and just go work with them and not without anything crazy?
I mean, before anything formalized, or with an actual tool like Focal, we it was very much, because we're a smaller company, right? We're talking years ago. This is maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and so the process was very much CS person's reached out to, they're going back and forth with the customer, and then the CS person gets to a point where they're like, don't have an answer for the question, can't resolve this problem. Let me reach out to my support counterpart over here. And typically, support we don't get involved with anything unless there's a case created. But in these cases, because it's for the customer directly, we have the CS person basically pulled the support person into the conversation pretty manually. There was no formalized customer Slack channel at the time, right? It was just a number of different channels depending on the day, depending on who's having a conversation with the customer from the CS side. And it was just kind of like I don't want to call it like a wild, wild west feel to it, but it kind of felt like that, right? Because there wasn't really anything formal aside from CS person's talking to them. They can't answer the question that the customer has, so they just kind of pick their favorite support person that they know, maybe in their geo or something.
So I mean, it's funny that you say that you were smaller, you're a smaller company. It's like Sysdig is definitely not a small company, and I remember going to a conference like 4 years ago where Sysdig was like one of the primary sponsors. So you're definitely weren't a small team. You weren't a small customer then, or a small company then. But how big was the? I think Stig's asking how big was the support team at that time?
Really good question. So again, the process itself sort of predates me, so I'm going based off of just some conversations I had. I think the organization was probably about give or take 20 people. Like it wasn't huge, 20 or 30. I would say 20 or 30, no more than that.
And that's the support team or the success team or both?
The support organization.
Gotcha. Okay, so you were kind of being pulled into a bunch of conversations. So at what point, like, how did you kind of know, like, okay, this is becoming too big? I mean, you mentioned you needed kind of better reports and you used the metrics, but it's like, at what point were you like, okay, this is a little bit too much to manage? Let's figure out how we can bring some order into to this chaos.
Yeah, I mean, I think what it comes down to is, when you're starting to have conversations about headcount, you're starting to have conversations about sort of where effort is going across your organization, and you're not able to easily kind of answer that question. That's when it got to the point where we were like, okay, we need to do something about this. We need to, again, operationalize it. And I think it was just something as small as that, right? Again, as far as the person who was there before me, who actually started it, I don't know if it was just as simple as a conversation with the VP at the time, but it literally was that, right? It was okay. We got to justify our heads here. We got to justify the fact that we need more. We got to justify the fact that we're doing more than what you see here, based on or we're doing more than what the numbers say, right?
So it sounds like in the beginning it wasn't necessarily about like operational like efficiencies in terms of like the process. It was more about just like understanding the numbers, understanding like how much support you're actually getting, or how much requests and how much you're actually processing, and what the kind of the cost of support is, I guess.
Right. Exactly.
Gotcha. So and then let's talk a little bit about like how this got implemented. So I think you were kind of brought in more on the implementation side after the Slack support thing started, right? So can you talk a little bit about like implementation? So how did you go from we have this we have a few channels, right? I guess all the vendor selection process stuff happened before, but in terms of like operationalizing it, not just the tool, but think about like what was the process that you took in terms of figuring out what past the tooling, like how do you apply the tooling, how do you best figure out how to use it, what other things do you need, what other like is there team changes that need to happen, so kind of implementation wise, like how did you do that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the big things for us was, and I'm just, again, I'm coming from the operations side. So for me, I'm always thinking about change management and how do I make a change to a process that's going to feel as effortless as possible, while at the same time involving all the right people, right? So I think, a lot of the questions that I had to ask was who outside of my support organization is really going to be involved in this whole process. Because it started with the CS team was pulling us in, right? So right out the gate, we knew that that's at least somebody that we need to be involved in this conversation, and at least their processes we had to factor in. So I couldn't just be siloed by just saying, okay, what is support doing? How do we do it? What's the new process going to look like for us? It was kind of more along the lines of what is support doing and how are we doing it, but also what are the other teams like CS? What are they doing? How are they doing it? How should they be doing it? And ultimately, who do I have to sync up with on that other side of um, on the other side of the wall to really kind of get this going efficiently. So one of the things that was definitely a headache was the fact that there wasn't like a oh, sorry, you guys still hear me? I think my Siri just blipped
Sorry
me.
about that.
Oh, okay. Um, so one of the things that we knew right out the gate was, well, we do need to make sure there are dedicated channels for our customers, without a doubt, right? We don't want to have you know Joe Schmo and Gene over here kind of just randomly creating a Slack channel with this customer, just a personal Slack channel, right? Because there were times where that happened. We're not right. So we want to make sure that there was a very much a sync between, well, how are we going to make sure that the right channels are getting created, that everybody's getting pulled in the way they need to be? What's the process going to be with regards to pulling the customer in? There's sort of a lot of back and forth there to kind of just make sure that we were kind of following each other the way that it needed to be. So ultimately, what it came down to was we we did want to make sure there was the ability to not just have conversations with the customer, but also make it easy for them to also create cases. So basically giving them the ability to go to a Slack channel, create their own case if they need to, or their ticket if they need to, but at the same time have the ability to also have conversations with the CS team, that may not necessarily need to involve the support organization. So there was just a lot of again, like, how do you make it as easy as possible, but at the same time use sort of the or kind of build out a process that encompasses everything that you kind of have to factor in. Not sure if that kind of makes sense so far.
I think so. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
So so I guess this is where, when we were doing our shopping around, we were trying to figure out sort of what vendors kind of made sense. And naturally we did end up with Foqal. And when we basically pulled you guys on board with us, or vice versa, depending on how you look at it, we we sort of we got to the point where we were able to say to the customer, you can create a ticket if you want to. You can just have a conversation with the CS folks if you want to. That was easy for them. With the CS team, there was some training for them. There had to be some documentation built out for them. Again, I'm not just building out documentation for the support organization. So it was kind of a lot of training on both ends. How is that handoff going to work? So it's really being very intimate and comfortable with what that process was going to look like. So that way, if CS has it, support knows they don't need to be involved. If support has it, CS knows that they don't need to be involved. So there's sort of a workflow that we had to sort of build out there to make sure that it sort of worked the way we were expecting to. And then, I mean, ultimately, in the end, is it was easy for them, I think, to transition over, because it didn't. The CS folks, they didn't feel like they were doing anything different, right? They were still living in Slack the way that they wanted to. And the support folks, they were alerted whenever a customer did need their attention from Slack, which was, I think, very different and much easier than kind of what it was before, where it was, you got to have access either to the Slack channel, or someone has to just randomly invite you to a conversation, and you don't really know what you're getting yourself into, right? There's some more kind of detail and background before they got involved.
It sounds like, yeah, that question of like where you're getting pulled into, like you might get pulled into a very easy question, or you might get pulled into like a 3-month project without,
Yeah.
just because of kind of your availability. So I guess this way you get a little bit of like way to tell, like, okay, what is the case about? Let me see if I actually can do this. And even if it sounds like, there might be a little bit of this like self-selection process where, when a case comes in, you can take a look at it and go, okay, well, this actually, maybe I've worked with this customer before. Maybe I understand this customer's issues a little bit more. You have that background, and even you can understand the question a little bit more. So you can say, this is actually something that I'm good at, or actually I'm going to recommend it to my colleague here who's probably better to take it.
Right. Exactly.
That's interesting. So, kind of in your from your process of, working with colleagues and figuring out, talking to customers, talking to everybody throughout your process, and kind of from where you started to now, what are the, there's some like best practices or recommendations you can make?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, definitely thinking about, again, who are all the teams that are involved, but also there's a leadership component there. Quite frankly, if I'm talking to the CS team, I'm not in their organization. Nobody in their organization reports into me. So I really got to get the sign off from their leadership team and kind of have them sort of help champion this new process, right? So it's really getting on the good side of the leadership team. Um, Gamify, right? I'm a huge fan of gamification. I love being able to say, to a CS person, hey, every time you every time you invite one of your customers to a Slack channel, is a chance to ultimately win some gift card, right? Or however many Slack channels you can create across all of your customers, right? Because I think there's a complexity of you don't know if the customer is gonna be on board for this, right? So you also kind of got to convince them as well, believe it or not. But gamifying it, I think, is great. And I guess that kind of rolls into sort of the legal side, right? You do want to involve legal, because not even so much of what's happening internally within your own company, but there are customers out there who might say, I have no interest or nor am I comfortable with having a bot from a vendor that I've never heard of operating in a Slack channel that I'm in. So really involving legal, setting those expectations right up front is really important. Now, even though the risk is very, very low, um, still every customer is just so different, right? So you got to factor that in. Um, Whatever tool you go with, especially if it's insanely flexible and you can build out workflows as you please, um, you want to make sure that you're sort of aligned with regards to the overall end goal, the process, really understanding from kind of an end-to-end perspective of how you want everything to flow, um, all the different touch points, right? While within that, vendor, you can do a lot. There's also stuff that happens outside of there, right? There might be some stuff happening, let's say in Salesforce, that has to happen before it even touches, you know, Foqal or whoever else you work with. So I think the importance there is just making sure that you also have your workflows in order and just a deep understanding of how it's all going to flow from an end-to-end perspective. Um, I think those are kind of the big ones that come up for me. I'm sure something else will pop up as we're talking though.
I like how I mean, I know historically I've seen your mural boards where it's like I'm sure that like you're doing this now and we kind of work together on mural boards in terms of like how are we changing and making improvements and stuff. But I think like in the past, I don't know if you did this, but like I feel like if planning out exactly what that flow of data and information and everything else on a mural board probably would have been really, really helpful, I guess, early on.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, and again, not just involving those kind of in your circle. Anybody who's going to be touching it, you want to make sure that they're involved in that process.
Anything that you kind of like that maybe didn't work or failed, or is there something that you kind of wish you knew before you kind of got started or started operationalizing support?
I mean, honestly, that was the workflow thing was probably the biggest thing for me, and I think that's just because when you're handed as much flexibility as you can get sometimes, that could be dangerous. And you can put yourself into a position where, let's say 6 months down the road, a year down the road, you might look back and ask yourself a question of, how does this specific workflow work, right? How does it flow? And if you're the one that built it out, and it's extremely complex, it can feel like you're finding a needle in a haystack. So I think I've learned my lessons from that at this point, but in the very beginning stages, you just don't realize it, right? Because you do get really excited about the flexibility and all these cool things that you could potentially do, and how you can embed it in, not just one tool, but tons of tools, your own, internal proprietary um, uh, uh, what is it, app, I mean, so it can get overwhelming very easily if you're not really strategic about it.
Gotcha. So one of the things that you talked about is, we met earlier, like you mentioned that you not only support your customers in Slack, but you also support kind of process, and you're doing a lot of the same stuff to support employees. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sorry, I think you broke up a little bit, but I think what you're asking me is sort of who was I supporting kind of outside of just a support organization, if I heard you correctly.
Sorry,
Um,
well, I was saying like you also support, we talked earlier, you said you support employees internally as well, not just your customers.
yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so obviously definitely supporting the customers, but we use this sort of Slack process for a couple other areas, right? At least currently, we use it for if, for example, our support organization is having an issue with any particular ticket, and they need to escalate it to our escalation engineering team. Uh, we have a process for that, right? So it's sort of like an internal process there. Same thing with our customer success team. Maybe they might have a question that may or may not be for a customer, right? But in the end, it's not being seen by the customer, whatever this question is. So they may very much open a ticket with us through this exact same process. Um, and what's nice is the flow is the same across the board, whether you're a customer, an internal employee, a peer, whoever, right? The way the team sort of functions from a flow perspective is all the same. And I think, now that I think about it, that's probably one other kind of best practice, right? Is how do you make sure that that flow, like you're not, depending on who you're talking to, it doesn't, the flow doesn't feel different. You want to kind of keep things as consistent as possible, right? You want to make it repeatable, no matter where that flow is kind of operating.
Very cool.
Can you guys hear me? Or
Yeah, I can hear you. I think something happened with Vlad.
okay, all right.
Hopefully comes back soon.
Yeah, I just pinged them. Yep. In the meantime, I'll wait for Vlad. I don't know if there's. Oh, there he is. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Looks like Comcast is not having a good day today. Okay, so you mentioned you've been doing this. So in the beginning, you said one of the main reasons for doing this is to get really good metrics. Um, what? So you've been doing this for a couple of years. What are your metrics? What have you seen? What are your kind of from the beginning? What are the KPIs you're tracking? Can you tell us a lot about like your results and your metrics?
Yeah, for sure. I have a slide I can share. Would you? I think you have it as well. Do you want to share your screen, or do you want me to share mine?
Go ahead.
All right, just give me a second here. Let me find it.
When you have a chance, there was a question in the chat, by the way, from Sandy Lee. She was asking how big was your support team?
Oh wait,
Oh yeah,
we covered.
yeah, yep. Can you? Sorry, let me see. Can you? There we go. All right. Um, so generally speaking, I mean, these were kind of the bigger metrics for us that really made a difference and kind of justified keeping the process that we have. Um, Actually, now I'm thinking about it from left to right, order of importance. It doesn't really matter, I guess. But ultimately, from a survey response rate, so whenever a ticket is handled and ticket's closed, we send out a survey. We're seeing more than twice the rate than we've seen with any other case that we get. So, for example, whether it's a case that we get through email, our customer portal, or any other medium, um, we're seeing that we get twice the response rate from a survey perspective, which is awesome. Our CSAT numbers are insanely high. With us, we kind of do it from a 0 to 5, which we're at about a 4.8, right, over the last quarter alone. But in the end, is 98% of our CSATs are positive, which is a great metric. Our customer response time is significantly faster, right? And I think that's natural. You can imagine if you have like a Comcast or any of these places where you sort of open a case with them through their chat support, it just naturally would be faster. And I think this is one of those cases where, again, the numbers have shown across the board that we are that much faster. And then also, we've found that of all cases that get opened across our organization, 23% of them originate from Slack. So let's just say we can round it to about a quarter of literally all of our cases come from Slack. So these are just some of the metrics that we cover, but these are the really important ones from a Slack perspective. And this is seeing these numbers kind of just justifies the fact that it is actually doing something, and it's doing something very good for our organization and for our team.
Awesome. Say we'll ask your question towards the end if you don't mind.
Sure.
So these are great metrics. I think one of the things that that actually when I was looking at the slide earlier, I wasn't sure if you meant 36% is your kind of first response time, or as in the first response from you to from your support team to the customer, or is that where you're saying that the actual customers are responding faster? So when you're talking to the customer, their response time is also faster.
That's a very good question, and sorry, I should have clarified that. So we're talking about initial response. So a case is first opened, we are that much faster kind of providing that initial response to the customer than any other medium.
So time to first response.
Exactly.
Awesome. No, these are great metrics. And I mean, I know also for your team, you're kind of that 23% of Slack origin cases, those aren't regular, customers that you only support. You only provide Slack support to some of your bigger customers, where it's not just any customer can get it. It's always the higher one. So even though it's probably 23% of case origin, it's probably weighted more on the bigger customers as well.
Yeah, I mean, just to speak a little bit more to that, the only customers who get access to this is our premium customer. So you have to pay more money to get premium support, and this is one of the things that you do get with premium source support. So if you're a standard customer, you don't even get the option of Slack support.
And that is a good segue into what are you doing into the future. So one of the things that we were talking about this earlier. You mentioned you're trying to kind of roll this out to more folks. You're building this into your support portal. Can you talk a little bit about how you're building this into the support portal, and kind of in some ways how you're planning on increasing revenue with this?
Yeah. So the revenue thing, actually, I can speak to that really quickly, because I think from a revenue perspective, as long as the conversation, as part of the conversation for premium support is that they get Slack support, I think that just helps, right? I think just because a lot of our customers do want to speak to us via Slack, that's a huge selling point, right? So do I have specific numbers on how this specifically has influenced our premium support revenue? I don't have that, but I do know that it's a helpful part of the conversation. Excuse me. Now, as far as the future goes, so as I mentioned, right now, kind of how we're using Slack is ultimately for when customers go into our Slack channel and then they want to create a case, or internally where we have a conversation that starts via our customer success team that goes to support, or even within our own support team when they got to reach out to escalation engineering. Some of the things that we're working on right now. So one of them is, so we have a customer portal, And what's going to be cool about that, it's not live yet, but what'll be really cool is if a customer goes into our customer portal, they will see one of three options, okay, in one of the boxes. If they are a if they're a premium customer, um, either A, they will have the option to click on a link that will bring them to the Slack channel that is created for them. Or if they don't have a Slack channel, they can click on a link to create one. If they're not a premium customer and they're a standard customer, they are there's an option to sort of upsell, right? Basically it'll show, go here to upgrade to our premium support. Look at all the cool things that you can get if you do have this, right? So that's one thing we're working on, which is going to be out very soon. The other thing that we're also working on is so currently Sysdig, we have our backend platform that kind of allows our customers to sort of manage everything. We're hoping to embed a chatbot in there. So ultimately, instead of going to a Slack channel, if they're ever kind of within our platform, they'll have the opportunity to ask a question or raise any sort of inquiry via this chatbot that will go either to us, go either to support, or it will go to the CS team. And depending on how the question is asked, it may very much open a case just right off the bat without having to reach out to anybody kind of directly, right? Like, so for example, if the customer is experiencing that they're down, right? They're completely offline. It will automatically create a case, no question, right? Versus a conversation that might get started initially before getting to the point of the case being created. So that's a sort of in the short term. That's something we're working on. And when I say short term, I'm thinking kind of within the next one of them probably within the next couple of weeks. The other one probably within, I would say, in the next quarter or two. Kind of future state. I think there's a lot of opportunity because right now we're just looking at Slack, but the reality is Slack isn't the only chat source out there, right? You have Microsoft Teams, you have, I don't know, whatever WebEx uses, you have Google, you have, we've had customers who want to talk to us through WhatsApp. These are all things that we've actually talked about and considered. In fact, WhatsApp was a very serious conversation, right, for a little while. And so it's really less about thinking about it from a Slack perspective and more about just any chat conversation that can happen with the customer ultimately can happen through this process. So that's kind of future long-term state. And when I say long-term, I usually try to be within the next year, right? But ultimately, that's something that I'm also looking at as far as what our organization looks like and what it could look like.
That is awesome. And quickly, speed round. What do you think is 5 years? Like, you're messaging, you're mentioning message-based support. You're not even messaging Slack anymore. It's like Teams and WhatsApp and all this other stuff. And these are all things that we're very we're building out to support as well. But like, what are you thinking in terms of 5 years? Not necessarily which platform is going to win out, but do you think it's going to be message-based support, or do you think that's going to be kind of a dominant way of getting support in the next 5 years, or do you think it's gonna kind of still be email, or what do you think?
I mean, I think all of it's still going to exist, right? I think just out of pure getting the customer options, I do think chat-based support is gonna. It's already very popular, right? So I think it's just going to increase in that popularity. I am curious where AI is going to take a part in this. Instead of talking to a support engineer, maybe you talk to some AI agent before you even get to the support engineer, where you get to more complex scenarios and situations. So, I do think with where AI is today, I do think that becoming a much larger piece of the puzzle.
Awesome. So a couple of questions for you from the stream. Do you find that CSAT for Slack originated cases is higher? Question from Sandy.
Yeah, definitely. This is kind of more of a gut thing, right? Because I haven't seen the specific data, but just based off of my own experience, with when you're being answered faster and kind of getting to a resolution faster, then I think just in general the customer is happier and they're more likely to give a better CSAT score, right? I mean, yeah, sometimes like there can be some back and forth, but generally speaking, chat is there to kind of make things operate quicker. And even more customers simultaneously, right? I mean, there's engineers out there who'll be having multiple conversations with multiple Slack channels. Not that we'd necessarily like support that completely, right? Because you can get sidetracked and confused. But ultimately, not only I think does it lead to a higher CSAT score, but I think you can just satisfy more customers in a shorter period of time.
Well, I mean, I guess the easy way is, not that you don't have to tell us, but like, if you know, do you know your CSAT score for email-based cases?
Email, yes. So I haven't. So I can tell you right now that our CSAT score for Slack is higher, right? Just across the board. We're a couple points lower in the other areas with email, with portal related. So we are a few points lower, not that much lower, to be honest, but it's clear that CSAT's higher with Slack.
Awesome. I'm just gonna cut out that part that CSAT is higher with Slack, and it'll be the what's it called, the video, the preview for this video. Another question from Javier. Do you get activity data from Slack? How do you identify the time, events, duration, participation of staff to be able to calculate costs, or do you get that stuff from Foqal?
So I guess you have a couple options here, right? So I don't get that information from Slack. I mean, can you? I'm sure you can. I haven't tried it, to be honest. I don't know how easy it is. I get it from Foqal. Most of that information comes from Foqal. I also pull a lot of information into Salesforce that we use. So, you can kind of pick your poison, right? Depending on sort of what type of data that you need. I think what I found with Foqal is, there's definitely there's a ton of data you can pull out from the dashboards. In fact, their current dashboard solution is very customized. I actually really like it a lot. But in the end, is any data that I am not easily able to get from Foqal, right? Where I have to really munge Foqal and sort of other areas of the business. That's where I kind of go to my analytics BI solution. So you probably like this answer, but it's kind of like it's kind of pick your poison. I wouldn't probably recommend Slack if you don't have to use it for just like data munging. I think Foqal, Salesforce, any other BI tools, you definitely that's what I would usually use.
Awesome. Any other questions that anybody has from the stream, or if anybody wants to unmute and say hi and anything like that?
Hey, Anthony, thank you very kindly. That was great. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Mike.
Awesome. Awesome. I guess the one other kind of question I was going to ask you along the way is, so as you're, I guess if somebody is not supporting customers in Slack today, right, and they're maybe thinking about it, what either advice do you give them, or what are the things that they should be thinking about if they're thinking about getting into supporting customers in Slack?
I mean, I think it's a no-brainer that they should be definitely thinking about it, right? So I think it's less of an if. I think it's more of a how, right? Like what makes most sense for you with regards to how you're going to support that customer, and that really depends on your organization, your company, so on and so forth. Because in the end, it's a demand area. Most companies out there, especially mature companies, provide some level of chat support. So I think it's more of how do you kind of keep up with that competition?
Awesome. Hey, Javier, how are you? Hey, do you want to ask any other questions, or should we go back to the stream?
No. I was just ready to say thank you and goodbye.
Thank you,
One
Javier.
last how about one last question from the stream, and then I think we'll cut it at that. Kevin's asking, how is it working with Foqal? Any future plans?
Yes, of
Um,
course.
yeah, I mean it's going great. As far as future plans, as I mentioned before, I mean, I think what's nice is I can very much leverage Foqal for pretty much any aspect of my chat business. I think one thing I didn't mention is, even in IT, you have your IT help desk. A lot of times they use Jira or other tools, Zendesk, I don't know, right? But um, there's no reason why you couldn't use like a Foqal, right? I'm a big fan of operationalizing in the sense of like, how do you consolidate? How do you kind of take all the different processes out there and sort of embed into sort of just a uniform just process, so that we're all sort of using the same tool and not getting confused with, oh, you're using Jira, you're using Foqal, you're using Zendesk, you're using whatever, right? How do we consolidate is kind of how I kind of approach it.
I mean, I think this is a good segue to, like, you told us your big vision, your master plan, your kind of like, how you see the world. Tell us about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's, if in a very short way, I would say, I think about it from a how do I embrace chat from literally an end-to-end company perspective, and I don't think about it from just customer onboarding or just customer in general, right? But I'm thinking about it more from a how do I get my company from when we wake up in the morning to when we're selling to the customer to when we get that close to when, heck, even when a churn happens, right? I mean, that's just the reality. Churns happen, right? Well, when a churn happens, maybe there's some sort of a process in there where a chat happens between the different teams that are involved and sort of formalizing or finalizing that, right? So it's you know really building that end-to-end landscape. How do I take it from soup to nuts?
I think one of the things that I remember talking to somebody about this was like, um, is that if you have this kind of support mentality, like the support mentality shouldn't just be in the support organization or kind of from support organizations, it should be kind of in all organizations across the board. Because at the end of the day, within any organization, you have a customer they're supporting, right? Whether it's like if you're an internal team, your your customer might be some other internal team. If you're, on the support team, you're obviously you're supporting other customers, um, but I think it's like having that support mindset always helps you kind of focus on relationships, focus on how do you help kind of other parts of the organization. And part of that is always just being able to make sure that you're kind of tracking what those requests, what those things that other people need from you. So it's kind of
Yeah,
like that support mentality of being able to like support others and track the conversation, track what others need from you and stuff.
yeah. Um, I did notice one other. Matt had a question. I wanted to definitely quickly answer that one for him. I think he's been waiting for
Sorry
that.
about that. Blind.
No, it's all good. So has Slack support been widely adopted by the customers with access to that option? The short answer is yes. In fact, I would say that the majority of our customers, when they open cases with us, once they're a part of the Slack process, they'll do it more so there than anywhere else. I think, how can I get it further adopted? This is where you think outside of just Slack, right? The reality is there's a lot of companies out there, banks, right? They don't like to use Slack. They'll maybe use Microsoft Teams or something else. So I think it's more of, how do you make sure that your process is going to be adopted by the wide array of customers out there, companies out there. And that might mean you got to really think about how do you integrate with all of these other chat solutions, not just Slack.
Awesome. Sorry, Matt. I didn't see that question for some reason. I am pretty blind, I guess. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, everybody, for joining and listening. Thank you again, Anthony, for the awesome content.